Hi, Congressman Bacon. It's truly an honor to have you here at our Futurevia podcast. I'm Alex, the CEO of Futurevia Foundation, helping Ukrainian children and veterans with prosthesis and rehabilitation.
Well, I appreciate being on, and thanks for your interest.
Yeah, so I was wondering that, actually talking about Ukraine and the Ukrainian war, have you ever anticipated it coming? Because a lot of people didn't believe until the day it started that it's going to happen.
Well, the intelligence was pretty clear from like November 2021, and we got that intel briefing, and then subsequently the Biden administration unclassified it. But we should have probably seen it more clearly even earlier because Russia invaded Crimea. We're attacking the eastern provinces of Ukraine. They tried to poison the Ukrainian president. We see what they're doing in Georgia. So really, what Putin's doing was what he's been taught since he was a little kid, that that Russia deserves to control its neighbors and that it's a superpower, and that it was what happened in 1990 was a travesty to Russia, and that's what they believe. And so all the neighbors know that, and they know that they can't trust Russia, and they want to be allied with America, and that's so Ukraine's going through what the Baltic sphere and Poland and everybody else. So Russia's a threat. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess a question for you would be given your background in the Air Force, how did that impact your decision making, and what do you see as the greatest challenges for U.S. foreign policy?
Most broadly, is that we're spending only 3% of our GDP on defense. Historically, we would do like 4%, and so we're underfunding our military for the things we need to do. With Russia doing this barbaric invasion of Ukraine, threatening the Eastern NATO countries. I know the Baltics feel very threatened. China eyeballing Taiwan and being much more aggressive. And what we're seeing with Iran, with the attacks on Israel, with all the ballistic missiles, America can't, the threats are global, and a 3% GDP does not allow us to provide that kind of deterrence globally. And at the same time, modernize our strategic forces, our nuclear legs of the triad, and buy the stealth fighters we need, the number of attack submarines that we need. So that's the biggest challenge. Our top line isn't big enough. And regardless of how big our top line is, we need to have strong allies, though, because we can't do it all by ourselves. And that's the strategic environment we're in.
Yeah, absolutely. And following up on that, a lot of people don't see U.S. as this global hegemon anymore. What are your views on that? Are you worried?
Well, we shouldn't be the global hegemon. We should be the biggest voice for freedom, for democracy, rule of law, free markets, and we should be that strong voice, the indispensable power. But we don't want to be a hegemon. We want to be with allies that America does not dominate or control, but that we're there because we're willing, and that we share values. And I don't want to be a Russia. I don't want to be a Russia that threatens its neighbors. I don't want to be a China that thinks all the neighboring countries are vassal states. We want to deal with independent allies that share values, that acknowledge that we have about 25% of the world's economy, and then have an outsized voice, but shouldn't be a hegemon.
Yeah, and absolutely. And with the shifting political landscapes in Eastern Europe, what do you believe should be essential policies to maintain strong alliances and keep the situation under control?
I think it's very important that we prevail in Ukraine, that the Ukrainians prevail. It's in our national security interest for Ukraine to be an independent nation, and it wants to be allied with the West, wants to share democracy and free markets and rule of law like the rest of Europe. And it's in our national security interest that they prevail. Because if Russia shows that it can just invade a neighbor country and break the international law, what's to prevent other countries from doing the same? It's a bad precedent, and we shouldn't let that happen. With the Eastern European countries, I'm very proud of the work that Poland has been doing, the Baltics and Romania. They've been spending pretty good high level of their GDP on defense. They've been partnering with America. We have an armor brigade that operates out of Poland and Romania, and we have battalions in the Baltic states. And they're also, we see Germany 4 deployed. We see Canada. We've seen now some of the Nordic countries more active. What these countries are doing what they need to do to deter Russia. We just got to do more of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, following up on that, like, what are your perspective on the future of U.S.-Ukraine relationship, and how do you see U.S. continuing supporting Ukraine?
Well, President Trump has made some good statements, and he's been more public in the last couple of weeks. During the campaign, I thought there was too much moral ambiguity between Russia and Ukraine. There should be total moral clarity. Who's at fault here? What's the evil country? It's this Russia's doing the invading. They're the ones bombing cities. They're the one leveling cities, and they're ones who are raping and pillaging the Ukrainian areas where they control. And they've kidnapped thousands upon thousands of Ukrainian kids and have dispersed them throughout Russia. So we should have total moral clarity who's at fault here. And I think what we hear for the last couple of weeks from President Trump, he wants to continue providing quantity and quality of weapons to Ukraine so they can win. He said if Ukraine must do well on the battlefield if we're going to be able to negotiate, the best peace possible. And so those are statements coming out from President Trump. Also, the general that he nominated, General Kellogg, to work with Ukraine, is very good on this. And I believe that we've heard other good statements from, like I think Senator Rubio has been generally good on this issue. Mike Waltz has generally been good on this issue. So he's putting people in that I think are hopefully will do better than what Joe Biden did. Joe Biden would send weapons, but it was always late. He was always worried about escalation, and he sent not high quality weapons for like a year or two, but until he got forced to do it. The ATACMs, for example, the F-16s, it was like pulling teeth to get those weapons there. And then he put rules of engagement on Ukraine that tied their one arm behind their back. And that's not what you want to do in a fight. I think Trump will be better at this than Biden.
Yeah, absolutely. And so another question is that Ukraine was forbidden for a long time to strike the Russian territory with American weapons. And what do you think about that?
I thought it was wrong. While Russia's bombing Ukrainian cities, we were telling Ukraine they couldn't bomb the airfields that had the bombers on it. It's not how you fight a war. You got to let Ukraine hit military targets in Russia, these very same military targets that are attacking Ukrainian cities. And to tell Ukraine you can't hit the bombers while they're on the airfield that are bombing your cities is just wrong. And so Biden walked that back a couple weeks ago, but it shouldn't have been that policy for a year. So it was just wrong, and it prolonged this war, and more innocent Ukrainians were killed because of it. And we don't want gridlock with Russia. We have to defeat the will of Putin.
Yeah, absolutely. And Trump said he'll end this war in 24 hours. How do you see that happening?
Not so. I think he's meaning it more figuratively, that he can end this war more quickly than Biden. I doubt he can do it in 24 hours, but I do think President Putin is not that. I mean, I think it worries him what Trump will do, because Trump is, he's not as well. He's not as risk averse as Biden. Biden was totally risk averse. Jake Sullivan, where they're afraid to do anything. They're afraid of their own shadow. I don't think Trump will be that way. And so I hope that we can end this war quickly on terms that are good for Ukraine. But in the meantime, let's keep providing quantity and quality of weapons, and we got to break Putin's will.
Yeah, absolutely. And another question is, how do you address like concerns of Americans about the level of like financial and military aid to Ukraine with like all the prices rising and inflation and stuff?
Yeah, there's some areas are Russian propaganda, and we got to call that out clearly. I mean, they're trying to say that Ukraine is taking money and and doing fraud and not spending it towards winning the war. They'll talk about Ukraine being on the side of Nazis. They're talking about biolabs. There's a whole bunch of Russian propaganda out there that we just got to call it for what it is. Now, the areas that are probably of a little more debate worthy is how can America best help end this war on Ukrainian terms? And I think it's a worthy debate. I think also we worry about our budget deficit. We have one. We have about a $2.4 trillion deficit last year, and but we got to acknowledge that the amount of money that we're spending on Ukraine is just a drop in the bucket compared to our budget deficit. And that if we lose this war, it's going to cost us a lot more in helping NATO and to because it's going to cost us more if Russia prevails, because they're going to threaten the rest of NATO and other of our allies. But there's some worthy areas of debate: the budget being one, the deficit, and two, how can we best win this war at our advantage?
Yeah, and following up on that, like what measures could be taken to bolster U.S. economy, help with like inflation, job creation, and address and economic inequality?
Well, at least inflation is currently back down, but that doesn't undo the damage that happened over the last 4 years. The Biden inflation made the average American 4% poorer than they were 4 years ago. And that's because of inflation. Now, granted, the inflation is down right now, but that doesn't undo the damage from the previous 3 years. And the best way to do this is control government spending. This inflation was largely triggered because of the American Rescue Plan. It threw about $2 trillion more on the economy, and we have a $22 trillion economy. So it makes sense that would create about a 10% inflation then, right? And because that was $2 trillion in deficit spending. We also did the Inflation Reduction Act, which is just shy of $1 trillion. And so it shouldn't surprise us that you throw all this deficit spending money onto the economy, it's going to create inflation. And we've been able to stop that over the last 2 years under Republican Congress. And that's why you're seeing inflation down. So we got to continue to work on our deficit and our debt right now. And I think it's going to take a debt commission, Republicans and Democrats working together, and whatever findings they come up with, that you have to put on the floor of the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate for an up or down vote. The last time we did a commission, we did not have that in the law, and the Speaker of the House decided not to vote on it at all. And I think that was a mistake.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so like public service often comes with like intense scrutiny and challenges, and how do you like maintain a balance between your professional and like personal life?
Well, I'm a Christian first. I believe gotta have your priorities right. I'm a Christian first. I'm an American second. I'm a family man, and I do that before I'm a Republican. And I want to do what's right. I think we have too many people in politics today. It's more about your side winning than it is to do the right thing. And you'll hear this phrase, the post-truth, generation. And what that means is people are more interested in winning and achieving goals than trying to do and stand for the right thing. And I see that in politics today in DC, but I see it, throughout our country. And we need to get back to our Judeo-Christian ethic that gave us a strong moral compass. Because if politicians are focused on doing the right thing, it's easier to find consensus when you're working with people from a different party. If you're more worried about winning at all costs, then it's harder to solve problems for a country. And and two, I've always tried to have a bit of a priority as priorities in my life. For example, I think you want to have a spiritual part of my life. I want to have a physical fitness part of my life. I got to have a family slice of my life. I got to have an intellectual development part of my life. And then you got to have your professional life. And the times of my life where I've let the professional slice of my life get too big, it caused damage to my family or my physical fitness. And so you got to have a balanced life. And I strive to do it.
Amazing. And are you worried that like American politics are like too divided? What do you think about bipartisan cooperation?
Well, I do think it's that way. I mean, I heard this last week when we were trying to do the current resolution. I heard people say we got to get 100% of Republican wins, and you can't let the Democrats win anything. Well, they control the Senate right now. They control the White House, so it's just so unrealistic. And even if when we control the White House, which we will on January 20th, and then we'll have a Republican Senate and Republican House on January 3rd, that you still got to work across the aisle to get bills passed because we have a small minority in the House. and the Senate, you got to have 60 votes to pass anything, and we only have 53 Republicans out of the 100. So you got to work across the aisle and find consensus areas to govern. And it shouldn't surprise us. James Madison, who was the primary author of the Constitution, wrote it that way. He wanted to ensure that no one faction, and that was the term he used, dominated the whole country, that factions had to work together and find consensus to solve problems. And this is why he wrote three branches of government. That's why he had the separation of powers as a big fundamental philosophy of the Constitution. That's why the Senate and the House, we make up one branch of the government. It's a bicameral, and it's meant to form or force consensus building.
Yeah, absolutely. And what do you think about like international lobbying groups? And particularly like 10, 20 years ago, Russia spent a lot of money like lobbying US politics and how that like affected Ukraine. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, we should have no foreign money in our politics. And that, granted, as a candidate, I can't accept any money from a foreign nation, but you can see some of the foreign money that come in, and maybe they have go-betweens, and they're put on dark money TV ads or doing social media influencing. We got to keep that out as to the best of our ability. I don't know how effective Russia really was in 2016. Frankly, I think it the real impact was President Trump was accused of colluding with Russia, and there was a 2-year investigation, and it was proven that Trump had nothing to do with Russia, but that the Russians were trying to influence our elections, mainly on social media. I don't know how effective that was, but the net result was that it actually hurt Trump for 2 years while he was being investigated, and so we have to acknowledge, and that part of that was because our politics are so partisan, and that we had Democrats engendering that story that he was colluding with Russia, and it was just false. I mean, it started off with the Clinton dossier, right? That was used to put the FBI on Trump and so his teammates. So I would say the direct impact from Russia has not been big on Russian interference, but the indirect consequences were very big. And it eventually led to an impeachment over that first phone call to President Zelensky.
Yeah, absolutely. And what role do you see like US playing in supporting democratic movements and defending human rights globally?
I do think America is the indispensable power. I never use that word hegemon. I don't like it. It's not what America wants to be. But we're indispensable because of the size of our economy, the size of our military, and without America, that voice for freedom, democracy, free markets, rule of law, there would be a big void there, and that other countries cannot fill. I mean, we can't do it without other countries either. So I got to make that clear. But without America, there's this void, and it'll be filled by Russia, China, and their allies, Iran and North Korea. And they are the antithesis of freedom and democracy, free markets, and rule of law. They want the world order to be that might makes right, that they can control the situation because they're the most powerful and they're the bullies in the room. And that's not the vision that America has. So America's the indispensable power. We can't be isolationists, but we also got to build stronger and stronger relationships with our allies because that's the only way we can stand up against all these countries.
Yeah, and how do you see like the future of politics with like China rising and becoming this hegemon, at least in the Asian region?
And it's interesting, Russia's becoming the little brother to China. You can see who's got the bigger stick in this relationship, and it's President Xi over President Putin. And basically, President Xi is propping up Putin by buying their natural gas, and Putin's beholden to China now. And I think over time, you're going to see Russia becoming more and more of a vassal state to China, which is ironic because they have a long history of not trusting each other or liking each other. But Russia can't do its thing without China's economic support, and that's what we're seeing there. So with China, they have an economy that's about 90% the size of ours, but it's struggling right now. They have a rapidly aging population, so their population is declining. I think they're in they're struggling as well. Uh, I think we got to realize that they're hacking our companies. They're doing cyber theft. They're malevolent when it comes to the cyber world. I think they're malevolent when you look at the space things that they have in the system right now where they can destroy satellites. Um, so we got to size our military with the focus on China, and but we also got to, I think we got to relook at our trade relationship. There's no reason why we're totally reliant on China for herbicides, for penicillin, and we got to diversify our trade sources. And we shouldn't be reliant on China at all for the key stuff. And I think we should be playing hardball with China on the trade side because they do unfair trade, and so that should be part of the agenda of the Trump administration coming in.
Yeah, absolutely. And like China being this like large manufacturing hub, what if China like uh cut its like ties with the United States, like for some like political influence or like other reasons, like
Well, they've
how?
hurt worse than we. They need us buying their goods more than we need to be buying their goods, and so I think they're going to try to protect their market. But we have to realize it's unfair competition when we try to trade to China. Their companies are being subsidized by the government so they can sell products at a lower price than us, and then it forces our companies out of the out of business. We got to realize this is how they operate. They're predatory on the economic side, and we got to protect our businesses. And I think not just America, all the free world. We got to figure out how to protect our businesses from China's, I would say, unfair trade and economic policies.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of people are kind of like don't like Putin, but also worried like what is going to be in the region if Putin is like gone like one day. And there, for some reason, has become this kind of like conception that Putin is like the only mastermind who can really rule Russia. So, what do you think about that?
I don't think I think Russia's culture right now. I mean, there's a lot of neat things about their culture. They got great art. I love their architecture. I mean, there's a lot of and their literature. Has been phenomenal. But we got to realize Russia, uh, its culture, it teaches that they should dominate their neighbors, that they're entitled to have this large empire, and they don't believe in Ukrainian freedom. They don't believe in Baltic freedom. They don't believe in Georgia's freedom or Azerbaijan or the stands and in farther eastern Russia. And that's the problem. So I believe that if Putin is deposed or if he dies suddenly, the next leader will probably have many of the same values that Putin has because that's sort of the culture right now. That's what they teach. That's what they teach on their TV. That's what they teach in their classrooms. And when you're taught that at a young age, you grow up with the view that you're entitled to control your neighbors, and that's what's going on here. So I don't see a short term solution to Russia. I think it's a long term problem, and so we're gonna have our hands full with them for a while.
Yeah, absolutely. And with like these imperial powers like Russia, Iran, and China, how do you see them, if at all, transitioning to a liberal democracy?
It does happen. We've seen it with Germany. We've seen it with Japan, and we've seen it with South Korea. Had a history of dictatorship, and now it's by the way, no democracy is perfect. You struggle. It's messy, right? But it's better than all other forms of government. My point being is, it can happen, but China has like no history of democracy, though we see in Taiwan it works. It's a beautiful democracy. I think that's why that's a threat to Chinese communist government, right? They see a functioning, prosperous democracy right off 90 miles off its border, run by Chinese. And Russia, they had a little bit of democracy in the 1990s, but I traveled there in 2004 as part of my National War College trip. And when you talk to the Russians, they had this view that democracy is for weaklings, that we needed a strong autocrat. That's what they were saying. We need a strong leader that can defend us. And I was like, defend against who? NATO is not going to be your threat. We don't want to have war with Russia. We're just trying to defend ourselves from an aggressive Russia. If Russia was peaceful, there wouldn't be Russia could let its guard down, but we have to have a guard up right now. And so it's going to be a long time before I think we see a positive cultural change in Russia and China and embracing our values.
Yeah. And so Ukraine used to have nuclear weapons before it gave it away when it was just like developing after the Soviet Union.
Hmm.
So how would if Ukraine had nuclear weapons today, how would that change the war?
I doubt Russia would have invaded if Ukraine had nuclear weapons. And you're right, Ukraine inherited many nuclear weapons from the Soviet Union when the Soviet Union collapsed. Then these countries broke away and got their freedom. And it's part of an agreement. This is under President Clinton's time that ourselves and Boris Yeltsin, working with the Ukrainian leader, made a commitment that if they gave up their nuclear weapons, that Russia, United States, and the rest of the signatories would always recognize the borders of Ukraine. So now we see that Russia is not honoring that agreement, and we saw it 2014. We see it. We see it right now. And but we have to. I gotta admit, I see this written a lot. This all this started in 2014. The problem was before 2014. We can't forget that Russia tried to murder the Ukrainian leader, right? Tried to poison him to death. And so the Ukrainians have been bullied and pushed around for a long time.
Yeah, and Russia doesn't really recognize Ukraine as its own country. They see it as part of their own state, as and they use the term like little Russians instead of
Yes.
sort of like these like third-class
Mm.
citizens of like this larger Russian empire.
Yep. Absolutely.
And as we're coming to an end here, so what's your like message to Ukrainians?
Well, we admire them. They're fighting hard. They're innovators. They're creative. They learn quickly. And I was just say, I, as an American living in Nebraska, want to see Ukraine succeed and defeat Putin, defeat the Russian army. And my hope is that Ukraine uh, can grow close alliances with the West, be part of the EU immediately, hopefully NATO down the road. And we want to see a prosperous economy in Ukraine, an independent country that can make its own decisions free of Russia threat. And and I've traveled to Ukraine and I admire the leadership. I admire the people that I met. I admire those men and women serving in uniform that are fighting a hard war. And Russia's paid for it. 730,000 casualties Russia has suffered under, and it was deserving. I mean, they started this war, and those are the consequences.